Instantly opening lines and challenging, the center sets the stage for an active game. Immediately challenging central space, black stakes a claim in the Sicilian defense, setting a dynamic battleground. Unlocking the queen's diagonal for early pressure and potential kingside activity. Preparing to liberate the dark-squared bishop and contest the center paves the way for a flexible game. Opening the kingside so aggressively can quickly lead to exposure if not carefully handled, a risky gambit for central control. Boldly challenging white's aggressive pawn advance, this counterstrike immediately seeks to unclog the center and seize critical central squares. Unveiling a subtle pin, this bishop leverages central control and pressures black's fragmented pawn structure, aiming to disrupt their coordination. Exchanging the bishop on b5 untangles black's kingside and prepares for central piece development. Clearing the bishop allows white to open the d-file and gain control, pressuring black's queenside. Recapturing the bishop immediately frees the queen, allowing it to survey central lines and prepare for future pawn pushes. Establishing a central pawn chain and opening a diagonal for the king's bishop sets up future pawn advances and controls key squares. Developing this knight adds pressure to white's central pawn structure, opening avenues for piece activity. Solidifying the center and preparing for development, this knight seeks to control key squares. Eliminating the central pawn opens up lines, but be mindful of your knight's development and potential central pressure from white's pieces. Liberating the d-file for your rooks, this opens up dynamic possibilities after recapturing the pawn. Trading queens now forces black into a passive rook endgame, sacrificing central control. Trading queens solidifies white's central pawn structure and simplifies to an endgame where knight activity is key. Developing the knight to its most active square, preparing to challenge white's centralized pawns and escape the pin. Pivoting the knight to the queenside aims to reinforce the central pawn structure and potentially develop an outpost. Asserting a knight's presence on b4 can disrupt white's coordination and potentially snag a pawn if opportunities arise. Relinquishing castling rights for safety, the king retreats from potential early skirmishes, aiming to solidify the central pawn structure amidst the ensuing middle game. Opening up the d-file, black immediately pressures white's somewhat exposed king, forcing a defensive reaction and asserting active piece play. Solidifying the bishop's influence over the queenside diagonal, while also offering a tentative shield for the king. Instantly contesting central space, this thrust aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and create dynamic counterplay on the queenside. Securing the king's refuge, albeit on a less conventional square, opens avenues for the rooks and prepares to contest the open d-file. Unleashing pieces from the cramped queenside, this square grants the bishop influence and prepares for queenside expansion and potential piece redeployment. Swapping bishop for knight offers a pawn majority on the queenside, but surrenders the bishop pair for no compensation. Black liberates the bishop, creating new tactical possibilities on the queenside while subtly improving piece coordination. Concentrating rooks along the open d-file aims to exploit black's slightly exposed king. Securing the king's central presence while preparing for queenside expansion offers strategic initiative. Knight repositioning aims to control central squares and perhaps pressure black's queenside majority. Anchoring the bishop to d6 aims to improve its diagonal influence and prepare for potential piece exchanges, solidifying black's central presence. Sacrificing a pawn to gain tempo and free the knight for active deployment demonstrates aggressive intentions despite the material deficit. Sacrificing the bishop opens a vital diagonal for black's rook and introduces complications around white's king. Sacrificing a pawn to gain attacking space and push black's king further into the open, creating potential tactical opportunities. Probing the center with the knight aims to disrupt white's pawn structure and open lines for counterplay. Anchoring the rook here grants control of the d-file and pressures black's isolated pawn, while preparing to improve piece activity. Sacrificing material to disrupt white's pawn structure is a bold, albeit risky, endeavor. Sensing vulnerability, white ventures towards the enemy king, forcing tactical recalculations and potential material exchanges near the monarch. Attempting to trap the knight is a tactical gamble that exposes the king further. This knight's repositioning aims to disrupt black's central control and potentially threaten the bishop pair, while also freeing the d-file for further piece activation. The bishop retreats, creating a temporary outpost for the knight while challenging white's centralized bishop. Unveiling an assault on black's now exposed king, this knight repositioning threatens immediate disruption. Boldly confronting the king's safety, this pawn advances to create new avenues for attack and restrict white's pieces. Resuming pressure on the d-file, aiming to displace black's pinned knight and disrupt their pawn structure. Unleashing the pawn storm towards the white king is a bold gambit, though it weakens your own king's shield significantly. Securing more space on the queenside aims to constrain black's bishop and potential knight outpost. The knight retreats to a passive square, surrendering its influence and allowing white to solidify control of the center. The rook sacrifice on d8 unlocks the d-file, creating an immediate tactical threat against the black king. Finally regaining a rook, black aims to activate this new piece, but white's centralized knights offer significant tactical threats. Simplifying to an endgame, white now aims to exploit the open d-file for their remaining rook. King is now active, but faces immediate pressure from the pawn chains. Relocating the monarch to f3 aims to rally your forces for a potential central pawn push, preparing for the inevitable king and pawn endgame. Activating the knight to a central outpost, this knight can now infiltrate white's weakened queenside. Relocating your monarch to the center opens avenues for active participation, a common endgame goal. Unleashing a pawn break here disrupts white's centralized king and opens avenues for black's forces. The pawn snatch clears a vital diagonal for the white king's advance into the center. Centralizing the knight immediately after the exchange creates crucial attacking potential and improves piece harmony in this tense middle game. The king now steps into the fray, aiming to dominate the center and support the pawn push. Safeguarding the king from the open file and preparing to contest the central pawn majority is paramount now. A decisive check forcing the black king into a vulnerable central position, creating immense tactical possibilities. Sacrificing the bishop clarifies the pawn structure, preparing to activate the king and contest the central files. Kings ventured forth, confronting the knight's outpost, initiating a forced simplification towards a queenless battle. A logical retreat, the king seeks a safer haven from the looming knight and the open files, setting up for a potential fight in the center. Pushing the pawn forward secures a queenside outpost and probes for weaknesses in black's pawn structure. Pushing the pawn forward aims to create a passed threat, but it weakens the kingside further. Boosting pawn structure with b4 aims to secure queenside territory and hinder black's advanced king's pawns. The knight's repositioning aims to anchor itself on a strong central square, potentially eyeing advanced outposts. Sacrificing the knight here aims to simplify into a favorable pawn endgame by eliminating black's active knight. Opening the queen file now promises a clearer path for your king, though watch out for white's knight advance. Unlocking the king's central dominion, this advance signals an aggressive intent to shatter black's pawn structure and dominate the remaining open lines. Steering the king towards the center acknowledges the endgame and seeks better activation. Snatching that pawn secures a material advantage, but be mindful of the exposed enemy king and how to exploit its awkward position. Initiating a pawn thrust to break open the kingside, creating a potential outpost for the knight while complicating white's defensive structure. The white king fearlessly marches into enemy territory, a bold pursuit of the remaining pawns. The monarch, now liberated from its pawn shield, dances towards central influence, seeking out the lonely outposts left undefended. Advancing the pawn creates a new shield for the monarch, seeking to activate it. The black king's advance now opens a crucial diagonal for potentially harassing white's pawn structure. A bold pawn push, aiming to create a passer and disrupt black's king's safety before it's too late. The kings now dance perilously close, and black's monarch faces significant exposure in this volatile skirmish. Pioneering a new outpost on the queenside aims to consolidate the king's newfound safety.